The night Renee Carter walked out of the only home her children had ever known, she carried 2 grocery bags and $41 folded into the lining of her coat. One bag held diapers and a stuffed rabbit with a torn ear. The other held a thermos, 3 changes of clothes, and a manila envelope she would not open for another 5 years. She had no car. She had no plan past the bus that ran until midnight, and a shelter on Larkin Street that took women without appointments if there was room. Her son was 6 and asked no questions because he had learnt not to. Her daughter was 2 and slept on her shoulder through all of it, through the cold and the bus and the long fluorescent hallway that smelled of bleach and old coffee. Renee did not cry on that bus. She had done her crying in a locked bathroom over the years, quietly, so no one would hear, and she had none left for the night that finally mattered. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that the building she would one day own was a building she had not yet set foot in, and that the man who would hand her the keys was, that very night, a stranger reading a ledger 40 blocks away, troubled by a name he could not place. She thought she was running toward nothing. She was running toward the rest of her life. Stay with me. Because the woman who left with 2 bags would spend 5 years learning that the smallest thing she did, when no one was watching, was the thing that came back to save her. She just did not know it yet. The shelter on Larkin Street gave her a cot, a crib for the baby, and a list of rules typed on a sheet pinned to a corkboard. Renee read every line twice. She had spent 8 years inside a marriage where breaking an unwritten rule cost her a week of silence or worse, and she was not going to lose this cot over something she could have read. Lights out at 10. No outside food in the dormitory. Chory Wheel posted Sundays. She read each one the way she had once read the fine print on a lease, looking for the trap, and found none, and the absence of a trap was so unfamiliar that she read the sheet a 3rd time to be sure. The woman who ran the front desk was named Patrice, a heavy-set woman with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a way of looking at people that made them feel counted rather than judged. Patrice took one look at the 2-year-old asleep on Renee's chest and the boy gripping the hem of his mother's coat, and she did not ask what happened. She asked what they needed. Renee said a place for the night. Patrice said they had that, and breakfast at 6, and that if Renee wanted to talk to someone about work, there was a woman who came Tuesdays. Then Patrice crouched, slow on her knees, until she was level with the boy, and she asked him his name, and he looked at his mother before he answered, the way a child does, when he has learned that the wrong word from the wrong mouth can change the weather of a room. His name was Marcus, he said, when Renee nodded that it was safe. Patrice told him there were crayons in the day room and that nobody here ever ran out of paper. Marcus did not smile, but his grip on the coat loosened by a finger, and Renee felt it loosen, and that small thing nearly undid her. She thanked Patrice and meant it, and then she lay down on the cot with both children pressed against her and stared at the ceiling until the radiator clicked off and the room went cold. Down the row, other women breathed and turned and murmured in their sleep. A dormitory of the temporarily homeless, each of them carrying a story Renee would never ask about, because she knew what it cost to be asked. She had $39 left after the bus. She had counted it twice, smoothing each bill flat against her knee in the dark, so the counting would not wake the baby. In the morning, she would need to make it last, and she did not yet know how, and the not knowing was the heaviest bag she carried. She slept maybe 2 hours. At 5, she was awake again, listening to the building come alive around her, and she lay still and did the arithmetic of survival in her head, the way she would do it every morning for years to come. Renee Carter had been a bookkeeper once, before the marriage swallowed her. She had been good at it, good with the kind of patient arithmetic that other people found tedious, and she had given it up because her husband decided a wife at home looked better to the people he wanted to impress. For 8 years her skill had gone nowhere but the grocery list and the rationing of a household budget he controlled to the dollar. He gave her an allowance and asked for receipts, and counted the change, and she had learned to make a chicken stretch, to 3 dinners, and to hide. Nothing, because hiding anything was dangerous, and the woman who had once reconciled a small firm's ledgers to the penny spent 8 years proving she had not stolen from a man who owned everything they had. Now, on the third morning in the shelter, she sat at the breakfast table with a pencil and a piece of paper, and did the only thing she knew how to do when the world stopped making sense. She made a column. Income 0, expenses, everything. And then below it, in the small, careful hand she had used since high school, she wrote a list of what she could do for money that did not require a car or childcare, or a reference from a man who would lie about her. Cleaning. She could clean. She had cleaned a 4-bedroom house until it gleamed for 8 years, and no one had ever once said thank you. That afternoon, Patrice gave her a flyer for a janitorial company called Brightwell Building Services that hired people without asking too many questions, paid weekly, and ran night shifts that a mother could work after her children were asleep, if the shelter would watch them. The shelter would, Patrice said, for the women who were trying. Renee was trying. She called the number from the payphone in the hall, feeding it a quarter she could not spare, and a tired man named Mr. Okafor told her to come in Thursday at 9 at night, wear shoes she could stand in for 8 hours, and not be late. Because the building she would be cleaning belonged to people who noticed everything and forgave nothing. She wrote the time on the back of her own hand in pen because she had no paper to spare and no phone to remind her. She was not late. She was never late. On Thursday, she left Marcus and the baby with a woman from the dormitory named Gloria, who had 3 of her own and away with children, and who told Renee to go and earn and not to worry. That worry never paid a bill yet, and Renee held that sentence in her mind on the long bus ride downtown like a coin she could spend later. The building was a 12-story office tower downtown, all glass and grey stone, with the lobby floors so polished it threw back the street lights like water. Renee learned its rhythms the way she had once learned her husband's moods, by paying attention so completely that she could move through it without being seen. She cleaned the 4th floor and the 7th and the executive suite on the 11th, where the carpet was thicker and the trash cans held torn drafts of things she never read. She emptied them. She wiped the long conference table. She ran the vacuum in straight even lines because crooked lines bothered her, and she polished the brass nameplate beside the corner office until her own reflection looked back at her, tired and steady and alive. The corner office belonged to a man whose name was etched into that brass, a name she cleaned every night without thinking much about the person behind it. Cornell Hayes. The plate said Cornell Hayes, and below it, in smaller letters, Hayes Property Group. Renee did not know who Cordell Hayes was. She knew his office smelled of cedar, that he kept a photograph of an older woman on his desk, a heavy-set woman smiling with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and that he worked late often enough that twice she had to wait in the hall until he gathered his coat and left, nodding at her without really seeing her, the way men in good suits nodded at the people who cleaned up after them. She dusted the photograph every night and set it back exactly where it had been, square to the edge of the blotter, because a man who kept one picture on an otherwise bare desk kept it for a reason, and Renee respected reasons even when she did not know them. What she did not know was that Cornell Hayes had been searching, quietly and without success, for a woman whose name he had carried for 11 years, and that the search had cost him more sleep than he would admit to anyone. He did not know her face. She did not know his story. They passed each other in a hallway at midnight, twice a week, 2 strangers bound by a thread neither could see, and the woman in the photograph on the desk was the one knot that tied that thread together, sitting in plain sight between them every single night while neither of them looked. The first winter was the hardest. The shelter could only hold a family for 90 days, and on the 88th day Renee moved her children into a single room in a boarding house on the east side, a room with a hot plate and a window that did not quite close, and a landlord who took cash and asked nothing. She stuffed a rolled towel along the windowsill against the draught, and taped a sheet of plastic over the glass, with masking tape from the dollar store, and on the coldest nights the plastic breathed in and out, with the wind like something alive. Her son started first grade at the school 4 blocks away, and Renee walked him there every morning before she slept, because she worked nights now and slept in the gaps, in the 2 hours after the school drop-off and the 3 hours before the pickup, never enough, never whole. She bought his shoes a size too big so they would last, and she folded a wad of paper towel into the toes until his feet grew to fill. Them, and Marcus never complained, because Marcus had learned in the old house not to want things out loud. She fed her daughter first and herself last, and sometimes not at all. And on the nights she did not eat, she drank hot water from the tap with a little salt in it and called it soup in her own mind, so the hunger would believe her. She kept the $41 story to herself, told no one she had started with almost nothing, because the people around her had started with nothing too, and there was no use comparing wounds. On Sundays she took the children to a small church with a leaking roof and a choir of 9, and she sat in the back and let the music hold her up. And she prayed the only prayer she had left, which was simply, "Let me keep going." The pastor was an old man who preached short because the building was cold, and once, passing her in the doorway, he put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing at all, just held it there a moment, and Renee carried the weight of that hand for a week. She kept going. That was the whole of her religion in those years. She kept going. Here is the thing about Renee that the people who passed her never saw. She was honest in a way that cost her. In her second month at the tower, vacuuming the 11th floor suite, at 1 in the morning, she found a money clip under the corner of Cornell Hayes's desk. A worn silver clip, holding what she counted, with shaking hands, to be $1,200 in 50s and 20s. $1,200. She was making $410 a week. That money was a month of rent and groceries, and the winter coat her son needed, and the dental bill she had been ignoring until it became an emergency. She held it in the cone of light from the desk lamp, and she thought about her daughter's shoes and the window that would not close, and then she set the clip on the center of the desk where no one could miss it. And she finished her work, and she went home and told no one. She did not take it because taking it was not who she was, and being who she was in those years was the only thing she still owned outright. The next night the clip was gone and nothing was said. She assumed he never knew. He knew. Cornell Hayes had a habit, born of a hard lesson long ago, of leaving small tests in the path of the people who had access to his life, and he had watched the security footage the next morning out of a caution that had hardened into instinct. He watched a tired woman in a grey uniform find $1,200, hold it, and set it down. He watched her go back to wiping the table. He did not know her name. He rewound it and watched it again, and something in his chest that had been clenched for 11 years loosened by a degree he could not explain. He told his assistant to find out who cleaned the 11th floor. His assistant, a brisk young man named Dealey, came back with the answer that she worked for a contractor, Brightwell, that the contractor did not share employee details, and that pressing for them would take paperwork and time. Cornell told him to start the paperwork. Then a deal in another city pulled him away for 4 months, the way deals did, and the paper sat in a drawer. And the woman who had set down $1,200 went on cleaning his office, without knowing she had been seen at all. The thread held. It did not pull tight yet, but it held. You have known someone like Renee, haven't you? Someone who did the right thing when the wrong thing would have been so easy, and no one would ever have known. Hold that person in your mind for a moment, because this story is for them too. Then come back, because the years are about to move, and the woman cleaning the tower is about to start becoming something else. Renee did not stay a cleaner because she lacked ambition. She stayed because ambition was a luxury, and survival was the bill due every Friday. But the bookkeeper in her never died, and slowly, in the gaps, it woke up. The boarding house landlord, an old man named Mr. Suresh, who owned 3 buildings and trusted no one, complained one evening that his accounts were a mess and his nephew who kept them had moved to Houston. Renee, paying her rent in cash at his kitchen table, looked at the shoebox of receipts he gestured at and said, almost without deciding to, that she could fix that. He laughed at first the way men laughed at her, and then he watched her thumb through the box for 10 minutes and pull out 3 double-billed charges he had been paying for a year, and he stopped laughing. She did it for a reduction in rent, $40 off a month, and she did it so well that Mr. Suresh told the man who owned the laundromat, who told the woman who ran the corner market, and within a year Renee Carter had a small constellation of tiny businesses whose books she balanced at night, after the tower, by hand, by lamplight, for cash that she folded into the lining of her coat the way she had once folded $41. She bought a second-hand calculator with a paper tape and a ledger book with a green cloth cover, and she taught herself the new software at the library on Saturday mornings, while Marcus did his homework beside her. The two of them at the long table under the high windows, both of them learning. She raised her rate slowly. She never missed an error. She gave people the truth about their money, even when the truth was unwelcome. Told the laundromat man he was losing 40 cents on every wash, and the market woman that her best earner was the lottery counter she kept, threatening to remove, and people came to trust her precisely because she would not flatter them. By the third year, she had moved her children into a 2-bedroom apartment, with a window that closed and a door that locked from the inside, and the first night in that apartment her son, 9 now, walked from room to room, turning the lock and unlocking it, again and again, learning with his hands that a door could be a thing that kept the bad out instead of the good in. Renee watched him do it and stood in the kitchen and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth so he would not hear her. She still cleaned the tower 3 nights a week. She kept that job long after she could have left it, and she could not entirely have told you why, except that the building had become the spine of her week, the steady thing, and the corner office with the cedar smell and the brass nameplate had become, without her noticing, a kind of landmark in her life. She still polished the plate. Cornell Hayes. She still did not know him. By the 4th year, Renee's bookkeeping had outgrown the lamplight. A woman she did the books for, who ran a catering company out of a converted garage, introduced her to an account downtown who was drowning in small clients he did not have time for, and he began sending Renee the overflow, the tiny businesses too small for his firm but too real to ignore. He paid her properly on invoices, with her name at the top, Renee Carter, bookkeeping services printed on paper she had designed herself at the library. The first time she saw her own name printed that way, she sat in the library computer room for a long time and did not move. She had spent 8 years as a man's wife and 5 years as the woman who cleaned the 11th floor, and now there was a piece of paper in the world with her name on it that meant she was something she had chosen. She framed the first invoice. It still hangs in her office today, though we are getting ahead of the story. What she did not know in that 4th year was that Cornell Hayes had come back from his long string of deals, tired in a way that money could not fix, and that he had taken the old paperwork out of the drawer at last. He had a reason now that was sharper than caution. His mother was dying. Cornell Hayes had been raised by a woman named Della Hayes in a cold-water apartment on the south side, a woman who cleaned office buildings at night for 30 years so her son could go to school in the day, a woman who taught him that you measure a person not by what they take when they are watched, but by what they refuse to take when they are not. She had come home at dawn with her hands cracked from the cold water and the cleaning solution, and she had rubbed them with petroleum jelly and worn cotton gloves to bed. And Cornell, as a boy, had lain awake listening to her move quietly in the next room so as not to wake him, and he had promised himself, the way poor children do, that someday she would never clean another floor. He had kept that promise. He had bought her a small house and made her stop working at 60, and she had complained that idleness would kill her faster than the work, and in a way she had been right. Della was 81 now, and her mind was going, and in the long evenings at her bedside she had begun to talk about a girl she had helped long ago, a young pregnant woman she had found crying in a stairwell of the building she cleaned, a girl with no coat in January, whom Della had wrapped in her own coat, and walked to a bus and pressed $40 into the hand of $40 Della could not spare, because the girl was carrying a child and had nowhere to go. She told the story differently each time, the way a fading mind worries a single bright thread, but the bones of it never changed. The cold, the stairwell, the coat, the girl's face. Della had never known the girl's name. She had thought about her for 11 years. She would stop mid-sentence and ask Cornell whether he thought the girl had been all right, whether the baby had lived, whether the world had been kind to her, and Cornell could not answer, and the not answering became the worst part of those evenings. And Cornell, listening to his dying mother, circle back again and again to the one stranger she could not forget, had made his mother a promise. He would find her. He did not know it was the same woman who set down his $1,200. He did not know she cleaned his office. He only knew his mother's story and the $40 and a January 11 years gone, and he set Dealey to the work in earnest. It is a strange thing how close two people can stand to a truth without seeing it. Renee had been 17 and pregnant with the son who was now 11 in the worst winter of her young life, before the marriage, before everything, when a heavy-set woman cleaning a building had given her a coat and $40 and a kind of mercy she had never forgotten. Renee had carried that mercy for 11 years the way you carry a debt of grace, looking for the woman to thank her and never finding her, telling her own children about her, on the hard nights. Lady with the coat, the lady who saw me. The $41 Renee left her marriage with had been $40 of her own, and $1 she had kept all those years. A worn single she could not bring herself to spend, the last of what the lady with the coat had given her, folded into a manila envelope she had not opened in 5 years because opening it meant remembering everything. 2 strangers, 1 coat, 11 years, and a thread pulling tight at last. The way it finally happened was so ordinary that Renee almost missed it. The accountant who sent her overflow work landed a new client, a property company reorganizing its small holdings books before a transfer of ownership, and he needed someone meticulous and trustworthy to go through 11 years of records on a set of older buildings. He sent Renee. The address on the folder was a 6-story building on the east side that the company had owned for decades and barely managed. A building of small apartments and a ground-floor laundromat, and Renee took the bus there on a Tuesday morning with her ledger and her reading, glasses and the careful patience that was her whole inheritance. The property manager let her into a back office and left her with the boxes. She worked for 3 hours in the quiet, and somewhere in the second box, between a stack of old leases and a water-damaged maintenance log, she found a folder of handwritten records. From years back, the kind of personal records a long-time employee keeps that never make it into the official books. They had been kept by a woman who cleaned the building at night. Decades of careful notes in a careful hand, and Renee, who knew a careful hand when she saw one, read them with the strange tenderness of one bookkeeper meeting another across time. And then she turned a page and found, tucked inside, a photograph. The woman in the photograph was heavy-set, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, standing in a stairwell in a coat. Renee knew the coat before she knew the face. She had worn that coat for 2 days in the worst January of her life. She had given it back at a bus stop because she could not keep a stranger's only coat. And the stranger had said, "Keep the $40, child, and God keep you," and walked back into a building Renee never saw again. The building in the photograph was the building Renee was sitting in. The woman was Della Hayes. Renee sat with the photograph in her 2 hands and did not move, and the years folded up like a map, 11 of them, all the way back to a frightened girl in a stairwell, and she understood all at once that she had been hired to balance the books of the building where her whole life had turned. She did not cry yet. That came later. First she did what she always did. She kept reading, because the records mattered to someone, and she had been trusted with them. At the back of the folder she found a note in a different hand, a man's hand, recent, clipped to a page. It said only, "If anyone ever finds the woman my mother helped in the stairwell. January. The year is on the lease. Call my office before you do anything else." And beneath it a name she had polished 1,000 times, Cornell Hayes. Renee called the number. Her voice did not shake, because she had spent her whole life learning to keep it steady. But her hand on the receiver was white at the knuckle. A man answered, and she said she was the bookkeeper at the East Side building, and that she had found his note and his mother's records, and that she believed she might be the woman in the stairwell. There was a silence on the line so long she thought the call had dropped. Then Cornell Hayes asked her, in a voice gone suddenly young, whether she had ever cleaned an office tower downtown, the 11th floor, the corner suite. Renee said she said she still did, 3 nights a week. She said she polished his nameplate, and Cornell Hayes, who had searched 11 years for the stranger his mother could not forget, and had walked past her in a hallway at midnight, twice a week, without knowing, put his hand over the phone so she would not hear the sound he made. The gap closed. For both of them at once, the whole shape of it became visible. He drove to the East Side building himself within the hour. Renee was still in the back office when she heard a car, and then a man in a good suit stood in the doorway. And she knew his face from 100 midnights, the man who nodded without seeing, except that now he was seeing. Now he was looking at her, as if she were the answer to a question he had carried his whole life. He said her name like he was testing whether it was real. Renee. She stood. She still held the photograph. He crossed the room and looked at it over her shoulder, his mother in the coat, and he said, "That's her. That's my mother. She passed 3 weeks ago, and the last thing she made me promise was to find you." Renee did not know she was crying until the photograph blurred. She told him about the coat and the $40, and the dollar she had kept all these years, the worn single in the envelope she had not opened in 5 years. And Cornell Hayes, a man worth more money than Renee had ever let herself imagine, sat down in a folding chair in a dusty back office and wept for his mother and for the girl in the stairwell and for the 11 years it had taken. The world to close a circle his mother had drawn with a coat. They talked until the light went gold in the window. He told her his mother had cleaned buildings for 30 years and had raised him to know that the people who clean up after you at midnight are the truest measure of a society, and that he had built a property company partly to honour her and partly to never again be the boy whose mother's hands cracked in winter from the cold water and the cleaning. He told her about the $1,200, that he had watched the footage, that he had known for 4 years there was a woman in his building who would set down a fortune because it was not hers, and that he had lost her in the paperwork and grieved that too. Renee told him she had only ever done what the lady with the coat had taught her, without words, that you do the right thing when no one is watching, because someone always is, even if it is only yourself. Cornell Hayes was quiet for a while. Then he made her an offer, and it was not charity, because Renee Carter would not have taken charity, and he knew it from the footage, and from his mother's stories, and from the steadiness in her now. He told her his company was carrying 6 small buildings it managed badly, the East Side building among them, buildings his mother would have wanted in better hands, and that he had spent 4 years looking for someone honest enough and meticulous enough to run them, and had not found that person until today. He offered her the management of all 6, a real salary, a real title, and a path to ownership of the East Side buildings itself, the building where his mother had wrapped a freezing girl in a coat, structured as a purchase she would earn over time, and not a gift she would owe. Renee did not answer right away. She had learned to distrust the sound of things being given. She asked him hard questions about the numbers, because she was a bookkeeper before she was anything, and his answers were honest. And the honesty was the thing that finally let her say yes. She managed those 6 buildings for 18 months, and she managed them better than they had ever been managed. Because she knew what it was to need a window that closed and a door that locked, and she fixed the things that mattered to tenants and cut the things that did not, and the buildings that had bled money began, quietly, to hold their own. She answered the phone when a tenant's heat failed at midnight, because she remembered the plastic breathing over her own window, and she put a real lock on every door, because she remembered her son's hands learning what a lock could mean. She found a leak in the East Side building that 3 managers before her had painted over instead of fixing, and she fixed it, and the woman in the apartment below stopped catching the drip in a saucepan after 4 years of catching it. Cornell came by sometimes and watched her work and said his mother would have done it the same way. And Renee said she knew, because Della had taught her, without words a long time ago, how a person treats the people beneath them when the ledger is closed and no one is keeping score. On a Tuesday in the 5th year after the night she left with 2 grocery bags and $41, Renee Carter signed the papers that made the East Side building hers. The building where a woman named Della Hayes had once knelt in a stairwell beside a frightened, pregnant girl and given away her only coat. The ground floor laundromat was still running. The small apartments were full. Renee hung her framed first invoice in the manager's office, the one with her own name printed at the top. And beside it she hung the photograph of Della in the coat, and beneath the photograph, in a small frame, she put a single worn dollar bill, the last of the 40, the one she had kept for 11 years, and finally let herself look at. Her son was 12 now and tall and unafraid of locked doors. Her daughter was 8 and did not remember the cold or the bus or the shelter, and that was the whole point. That was the reward Renee had worked 5 years for, that her children would not remember. They came to the building on the day she signed, and her son walked from apartment to apartment, the way he had once walked the 2-bedroom turning. The lock, except now he was not checking whether the bad could get in. He was looking at a thing his mother owned. Cornell Hayes came too, and he stood in the lobby with Renee and looked up at the 6 stories of a building his mother had cleaned, and said his mother would have liked, knowing it ended this way. Renee said it had not ended. She said it had only kept going, which was the only prayer she had ever known how to pray, and that some prayers take 11 years and a coat and a stairwell and a careful hand to be answered. Years later, when people asked Renee Carter how she went from a shelter cot to owning a building, she did not tell them about the deal, or the salary, or the 18 months of accounts. She told them about $1 she could not spend, and a woman who saw her when no one else did, and the night she learned that the smallest mercy, given freely in a cold stairwell to a stranger you will never see again, does not disappear. It waits. It keeps. It comes back wearing a face you did not expect, 11 years later, to give you the keys. She still keeps the $1 in its frame. She looks at it some mornings before the building wakes, the worn single under the photograph of the woman in the coat, and she thinks the same thing every time, that kindness has a longer memory than cruelty, and that she will spend the rest of her life proving it true. If you have ever set something down that you could have kept, and walked away the poorer for it, leave a word below for the woman in the stairwell and everyone like her. And if this one stayed with you, there is another waiting, about a different soul, the world overlooked until the day it finally had to see.